This story begins in a snow-covered forest. There was a person running desperately, his body bruised and bleeding, trying to resist the intense cold. He was confused, didn't understand what was happening, and didn't know why he was running like that until he finally remembered why. It was at that moment that he was hitting the leg and fell into the snow. A man approached him with the sword in his hand and spoke contemptuously, saying that he was running away like a cowardly failure and that it would be easier if he just died. He called him young master Yu Baek-jun. As he lay bleeding in the snow, Yu Baek-jun wondered at what point it all went wrong. He knew he shouldn't have accepted that bet and shouldn't have become a character in a game. He remembered that within the game he had received a message in the chat asking if he would like to accept a bet. If he won, he would get a wish. He was curious, thinking that maybe this meant he could get rich, and commented to himself that it was the first time he had seen someone of such a high level betting like this. He thought that he had just cleared the route of Yu Baek-jun's story and wondered where everyone had gone. It was then that the game was presented, called Path of Heroes. It was a modern game connected to another world where monsters appeared through portals and hunters fought against them. The game drew a lot of attention at launch because of its adventure, well-detailed world, hidden elements, and unique characters. Even though it was single-player, it was incredibly popular. However, the success was short-lived. In just 1 year, Path of Heroes lost almost all of its players. The 5 unique characters died easily, and every time the player died, they had to start all over again. The game was practically taboo with only a 0.1% completion rate. That was the general average, with the exception of the route taken by the first character, protagonist Han Chang-woo. All the other routes, including Yu Baek-jun's, were almost completely abandoned. Only one person in the world managed to complete this route, and that was the protagonist. It was at this point that Yu Baek-jun realized he was alone in the game room. He wondered if the game had crashed completely or if they had created a new room and left him out. Suddenly, a user nicknamed Supreme Lord Celestial entered the room. He was the leader there and asked if anyone was still present, thinking he had already kicked everyone out. Yu Baek-jun suspected that it was Tang who had created the room and sent everyone away. Then came the proposal. A new bet was offered. If he cleared the route, as the room leader had said, he would win a wish. Yu Baek-jun found the proposal suspicious and thought that perhaps the Lord was a millionaire. He also wondered what would happen if he failed, but apparently there were no consequences. Still, he found it a bit strange. He almost said that he had cleared all the routes, but gave up. If he revealed that, everyone might find out his secret. He knew that high-level players attracted a lot of attention, perhaps even enough to become professionals, and he couldn't let this opportunity slip away even with misgivings. He decided to accept. He figured that worst-case scenario, he wouldn't lose anything. After all, he had already cleared several routes and only needed to choose one to follow now. But then he suddenly became dizzy. The Lord explained that this was no longer a game, was reality. Soon afterwards, Yu Baek-jun passed out on his computer, and the system informed him that he had made that choice himself. When he woke up, he was back in the snowy forest, confused, and trying to understand where he was. He noticed his long hair and became even more confused. When he looked back, he saw several armed warriors approaching. One of them shouted that the young master was there. It was then that Yu Baek-jun recognized the man. It was Shin Woo-hyun. Yu Baek-jun wondered if it was all a dream because he was talking to one of the characters in the game. Didn't make sense. Shin Woo-hyun, however, claimed to be his instructor and said that they had a training session scheduled for that day. Yu began to realize that those were exactly the same lines from the game. Shin then apologized, but explained that the training that day would be more difficult than usual because Yu's older brother wanted him dead. Just then, Yu was hit by a blast of energy in the shoulder, opening a deep tear and causing heavy bleeding. Shin was surprised and revealed that the blow was meant to hit his heart, but Yu had managed to dodge it in time. It was then that Shin appeared, saying that even though he was the weakest of the family, the Holy Family was still powerful. He said that the shame of the family should die, and that he could kill Yu cleanly and painlessly, sending him straight to the afterlife. At that moment, Yu Baek-jun finally accepted that it was real. It wasn't a game. It wasn't a dream. Now that he realized this, he understood that if he did something wrong, he really would die there. He tried to calm down. Even though the pain was throbbing and his legs felt weak, he forced himself to stand. The pain was real. The sensation was clear. And then he remembered the message that clearly stated that for him, this would be reality, not a game. You began to connect the facts, the last message, the longer hair, Shin's persecution. It all made sense now. He didn't know how it had happened, but one thing was certain. He had to survive. He had played this route many times before, so he tried to remember the path he always took at the beginning. He knew that the route started with him, running to try to escape. Meanwhile, Shin Woohonyun just watched him, standing still for a moment. Later, we returned to the present moment where Yu was already captured. Shin insisted that it would be much easier if he just died soon, but Yu continued to resist, thinking that he just needed to hold out a little longer. Shin warned that he didn't intend to let Yu die alone. As soon as he was done with him, he would kill all his servants as well, and he asked if he had any last words. It was then that one of the people in the group noticed something strange. The snow around them was moving too much. It looked like an avalanche was forming. Yu answered yes, that he had last words, and started to say something. When Shin asked what he had said, a wolf rushed forward violently, and a huge amount of blood flew through the air. But it wasn't Shin's blood. It was the wolf's blood, easily killed by him. Shin then wondered if the whole plan was just to attract the attention of a snow wolf, but he soon heard screams coming from behind. His group was being massacred by a whole pack of snow wolves. Even so, Shin despised them, thinking that his allies were too weak to be of any use, being easily terrified by wolves. Even so, he recognized that snow wolves in large numbers could be problematic. He therefore decided to eliminate the pack quickly before finishing what he had started and killing Yu Baek-jun. When he looked back, he realized that Yu Baek-jun was no longer there. He had run far away. Meanwhile, Yu had messed up and mixed the wrong herbs. He realized that it was hurting too much until a system screen appeared in front of him. Even though his skill was terrible, he managed to create a new ointment. Thanks to his excellent understanding of medicinal herbs, Yu used the unnamed ointment. Over a short period of time, his wounds began to regenerate. He also gained a strong resistance to the cold. The ointment took effect and healed his wound. He realized that yes, he had mixed it correctly, but he knew that he could no longer confuse himself on this route. He also remembered that it had taken him 2 years to clear this path once, and now he would have to clear it again. He knew he was really screwed and wondered why Baek-yun had been thrown onto one of the worst possible routes. It was explained that he is a descendant of the Holy Sword family, a lineage located in Seorak, Korea, founded by a powerful martial god who had solved a portal incident. Many years ago, at a certain point in history, this martial god disappeared, but left behind books with teachings that allowed his lineage to grow into an extremely prestigious sect in Korea. The successor to the Green Cavalry, one of the 5 colored walls, was precisely Yu Baek-yun. Even so, he thought that being in the game was much harder than he had expected. He didn't know what to do properly, but at least thanks to the ointment, he wouldn't freeze to death so soon, even though he knew it would only last a maximum of 30 minutes. This meant that he had no time and that every decision would be crucial. He thought that, if that message he had seen earlier was right, then the Path of Heroes system really did exist. Yu opened his status window. All his attributes were at F1 level out of 100. He had no unique ability, no special trait, nothing. He recognized that, as he had expected, he was completely useless, even worse than the average person. He thought that Yu Baek-yun's route was even more hopeless because it started with a fatal injury. If he let his guard down or made a single mistake, he would be dead. He also ran the risk of suffering a serious hemorrhage, although he had bought himself some time by tricking the snow. He knew that Shin wouldn't give up easily. With the artifact he was using, it was only a matter of time before he caught up with him. Yu Baek-chun thought that he had the worst possible status, didn't have any useful items, and wondered how on earth he was going to survive in that situation. The only solution was to find his way out of the forest labyrinth. Meanwhile, the warriors chasing him had killed the snow wolves. Suddenly, something glowed in Shin's chest. It was the artifact that tracked magic. He said that this time he was going to capture that little mouse. Someone warned him that the direction in which he was fleeing led straight into the Praeden 7. Forest Labyrinth Shin said that everyone there had to be ready to risk their lives. He thought that to have been recognized by Yute Rang, Yu Baek-yun was definitely no ordinary person. Meanwhile, Yu Baek-yun was running toward the Forest Labyrinth. He thought that in the world of Path of Heroes, monsters are humanity's greatest enemies and that hunters exist to exterminate them. The difficulty of these monsters varies greatly depending on their type and the portal they come from. They are classified as monsters that are easy to kill, a little difficult, and extremely dangerous. However, there is one place that even the most experienced hunters avoid going through. That place was exactly where Yu Baek-yun was now, the region of Seorak, his homeland. While running, Yu Baek-yun spotted a huge snake, a monster that lived in the forest. He thought that he didn't really know the place, that there was no detailed information about this region. The monsters there live like wild beasts, creating their own ecosystems. The terrain was already naturally difficult as it was mountainous, but it had also become so dangerous that even the most experienced hunters avoided. Going there, Yu wondered why that character had been played by Seorak. It was then explained that instructor Shin Woo-hyun works alongside Yu's brother Baek-jun and wants to become his successor. As someone who has always been by Yu's side since childhood, Shin was the person assigned to deal with him. That's why he was the one who took Yu Baek-jun to the top of the Suwon Mountains. In other words, the player's mission on this route is to survive in the snowy countryside and make it back home. This was the standard strategy at the start of Yu Baek-jun's route. Along the way, Yu came across a gravestone. He thought that the reason he hadn't returned to his family yet and was still wandering around was precisely because of this. The Seorak region held a secret that was never revealed because no one else visited the place. However, the forest labyrinth, located in the center of Seorak, hid a special opportunity. It was engraved on the tombstone that those who were not prepared to risk their lives or who believed the place to be peaceful should return immediately. At the same moment, Shin and his squad were also reading the same message engraved in the stone. A woman asked him if he really intended to enter that place, remembering that many had already died there. Shin replied that he understood her reluctance, but that it was necessary to recover Yu Baek-jun's body and told her not to worry too much, as he was carrying an artifact from Yu Tae-rong, which would make the mission less dangerous. Even so, Shin admitted to himself that something was bothering him. He wondered if Yu was really so foolish as to enter that place. It was as if he was acting completely different. But soon Shin found footprints on the ground. They were Yu Baek-jun's footprints, and from the look of them, he concluded that it had only been a short time since he had passed that way. As he was injured, Yu couldn't have gone very far. Shin then ordered them to chase him down and eliminate him immediately. Sometime later, the group was walking through the forest very carefully on the lookout for any beasts that might appear. The same woman still showed concern and commented that they seemed to have been walking in circles for some time. She asked if Shin really knew where they were going. Shin replied by asking if she had forgotten where they were when suddenly they passed a body. Shin explained that this was labyrinth breathing, a phenomenon that made it impossible to tell if they were on the right path or just going in circles. The body they had just found had probably passed that same point hundreds or even thousands of times before it died. This was the principle of so-called labyrinth breathing, a phenomenon that caused people to walk in circles until they were exhausted. There was even a tradition that warned about this, saying that if someone didn't want to wander to their death inside the labyrinth, they should follow a certain method to escape. Meanwhile, Yu Baek-jun was trying to find a way out. He thought that at this rate he would really end up dying there. It was then that he realized how incredible the power of the herbs was. If it hadn't been for them, he would have been dead a long time ago. At the same time, he felt something inside him, a strong instinct that said that if he died in that game, he would really die. He got angry when he remembered that the bastard hadn't even warned him about the risks. He felt that he had been completely tricked, but he recognized that it was he himself who had chosen to take part in it. Even so, Yu also thought that he had deceived the man by pretending that he had never passed this route. He felt his energy draining and believed he was nearing. During the end, until he finally came to an opening. In front of him was a cliff. He remembered that the first time he had reached it, he had been in total despair. He thought there was no way through, that it was a dead end, and he believed he would die right there. At the time, he had no idea that this place would be of any use to him. Now, however, he knew that it was then that Yu Baek-jun realized it was time. He was caught up by Shin and the rest of the platoon. Shin commented that he had managed to escape up to that point and that he had done well. Yu thought that he didn't even bother calling him young master anymore. Shin then said that of all the possible places he had escaped precisely to a cliff, but that unfortunately his stamina would no longer make a difference now. Yu asked why he was doing this to him. He asked if he had become Tae-rang's puppy. Shin replied that he had understood everything very quickly. He said that yes, he had decided to help the young master, Yu Tae-rang, because his strength would bring many more benefits to the Holy Sword family. Yu thought that the whole thing had just been a test and concluded that the world really was just like the game. Now that he was sure, he knew he couldn't waste any time if he took too long, he would end up freezing to death right there. It was then that he felt a shock run through his body. He thought that the freezing was no longer the biggest problem because before that, he would end up dying of a hemorrhage. Shin commented that this conversation was already wasting everyone's time and noted that it looked like Yu would die before he even had the chance to kill him. Finally, he said that he could help him with a quick and painless death, which would be the last thing he would do in the name of his former young master. Yu commented that this was very kind of him, and since it would be the last time, he decided to give Shin a warning too. With a discreet smile, he explained that the artifact around his neck was for single use only and called Shin an idiot. Just then, Shin launched another blast of energy in Yu's direction, but he simply jumped off the cliff. While still in the air, he was hit, wounded even more, and fell straight off the cliff. Nothing remained of the impact. The warriors around him said that he now looked dead. Shin commented that he wouldn't be able to recover the body, nor would he have any evidence that he had actually killed him, so they decided to return for the time being. As he looked at the artifact on his neck, the necklace really didn't work. Shin was confused, not understanding why, and wondered if what Yu had said was true. It was then that creatures began to approach, saying that they smelled human, the smell of human blood. They were like demons approaching. Meanwhile, Yu, still falling off the cliff, was enveloped by a mysterious energy that saved him. He felt alive, almost dying from bleeding, but he survived the fall. Downstairs, he found a holy book. Even though he was injured, Yu took the book and understood that he needed to recover as quickly as possible. Soon after, he fell unconscious. Even so, the system counted the event. In front of him was the martial god's book. After his blood connection was confirmed, he was accepted by the book, which used Yu's blood to enhance his body. His body was then filled with divine energy, and Yu opened his eyes again, now full of power. It was explained that whoever opened the book would probably be a descendant of the martial god himself, someone whose name the god would never know, but who would inherit his legacy. At the time he wrote that book, the martial god didn't have long to live, which is exactly why he created it. Even though he knew it would cost him his life, he recorded a new martial art emerging in the world in the hope that it would be used for a noble purpose. Yu, in his thoughts, replied to the founder that yes, that art would be used for a very good reason. He already looked fully recovered, as if he hadn't even been on the verge of death a few seconds before. The system announced that he had received the unique ability called Book of the Martial God, as well as the special trait Martial Celestial Body. Because of this trait, his body was automatically strengthened and all his attributes which had previously. Bennett level F rose to level C, however, he still only had 1 point in each. Even so, Yu claimed that his body had completely recovered, so he considered it a success. Yu's statuses had also increased, but more importantly, he had obtained an extremely powerful skill and trait. He reflected that the hero's path is very unusual in that it doesn't use a level system. Instead, the player needs to constantly grow to increase the proficiency of their skills and traits, which is not an easy task. Of all the characters who follow this path, Baekhyun is undoubtedly the most difficult. What dramatically reduces this difficulty for Yu Bok-jun is exactly the skill and trait he has just obtained. That's why he endured that situation, even on the brink of death. The first thing he decided to check was the heavenly body. He had been given an innate talent for martial arts by the heavens, along with a physique that was extremely optimized for it. This body allows him to quickly understand and learn any martial art, as well as grow physically at high speed. It also increases the power of the skills he uses. You thought that this trait enables accelerated growth in attributes, rapid mastery of skills, and facilitates the acquisition of new techniques. Without a doubt, it was an extremely powerful trait that would certainly help him survive. After that, he analyzed the unique ability book of the martial god. It was explained that this book was left by someone who reached divinity at the end of their life. It contains all the martial arts in the world, and by some unknown power, new martial arts are recorded automatically. The book awards points based on the missions or actions of its owner, who can then use these points to learn the skills recorded in it. It was also explained that a unique skill is something that only one person can possess, unless it is transferred by a special method. Other than that, no one else can learn it. Yu concluded that this guy's skill was really strong. He could now learn any martial art from all over the world, and that wasn't just limited to traditional techniques. Some more fanciful style skills, even if different, also ended up falling into the category of martial arts, which allowed him to learn them. However, he thought it was a shame that he couldn't learn alchemy or magic. Even so, he knew that there were other methods of dealing with this, and since he had obtained this skill, he would certainly use it. At the moment, he had 100 points available and a new mission active. When he clicked on the Points tab, a list opened up showing the skills he could acquire immediately. Among them were the SJ Sword Technique, the Crushing Charge Blow, and the Principality of Rafelda's Spear. However, you considered all these options to be useless at the moment. Besides, in the conditions he found himself in engaging in combat now would be practically suicide. On second thoughts, you concluded that there was no need to fight now, as it would be suicide. The most important thing at the moment was as a specific skill, the light body technique. This martial art made the body more agile, increased speed, reflexes, and reaction time. You understood that this technique was essential for both movement and combat. It was useful now and would continue to be so in the future. What's more, when his proficiency with the Book of the Martial God increased, he could do a lot of fun things by combining this technique with other skills. The last thing he needed to do now was fulfill his mission. There were two available on his list. The first was called Catch Me If You Can, and the second was called Allow Me to Be a Tomb Rider for a Day. You found the second name horrible. But when he accepted it, a stone door opened in the cave where he was. He realized that by accepting this mission, he was facing the entrance to a labyrinth. At the end of this labyrinth, there were useful rewards for starting the game. The real reward was the tomb of the martial god hidden down there. He also wondered what had happened to Shin. Had he escaped that situation? At that moment, the entire platoon was dead, but Shin was still alive, hiding in a treetop. He was shaking with fear, not knowing how to react. It was then that he was attacked by a huge white snake. You imagined that Shin had probably survived, but it still didn't matter. If he survived, he'd certainly ended up getting lost in the forest labyrinth. Meanwhile, you gathered some strange plants such as the sungrass, the grass fire spirit, and also the flaming jinang. After that, he opened a chest that was lying there. Inside was a small bag and a root. The system informed him that he had obtained the 1000-year-old Jinsum Nevada and a treasure of help. The mission was completed. Received the treasures from the tomb and was also rewarded with 500 points and a dark ghost. As the tomb of the martial god had fulfilled its purpose, it would be sealed again, and the system asked you to return to the surface. Taking all the items out of the trunk, you mentally commented that looking at it that way, it all seemed quite romantic. A tomb hidden under a cliff fitted in perfectly with the stories of the marine world. Surely that was the resting place of a martial god. The problem was that his own family had hidden his fortune and was probably responsible for building that labyrinth, but thanks to that, life was now much easier. He was even wearing the mantle of the martial god called the Dark Ghost. This cloak had been made from rare materials by a master craftsman. It was incredibly durable and had two functions, phantom stealth and adaptability. Phantom stealth significantly increased the cloak's defense and allowed it to repair itself automatically when damaged. Adaptability, on the other hand, adjusted the cloak to any environment, ensuring total comfort for the wearer. Soon afterwards, you used the system to teleport out of there later at the guard post at the first. Of the Holy Sword family, there was a guard playing a small video game until a figure appeared at the window. He thought it was a monster, but soon realized it was the young master. Yu Beikyun then looked directly at him and told him to call Choi Sung-min immediately. As he lay unconscious again, Yu remembered that moment of despair. The memory of his own blood came to mind. Meanwhile, in the main house, some people were discussing whether he would wake up. They said he had been asleep for 4 days. The pharmacist of the Holy Sword family, Jung-won, said that the young master would wake up soon as he wasn't. Even that badly hurt, he just asked them to wait a little longer. Next to him was Choi Sung-min, the attendant from the Holy Sword family. Choi commented that it didn't seem to have been caused by any injuries, then asked why Yu was in such a state. Jung-won replied that nobody knew for sure. He explained that there were no visible or external wounds, and on the contrary, Yu's energy even seemed better than before. Even so, Choi insisted that he didn't look well. Perhaps he was having a nightmare. It was then that Yu really woke up, coming out of a nightmare. He was panting, but everyone around him was happy to see that he had finally woken up. Yu wondered if it was just a dream. He got up quickly, went to the window and opened it. Outside, he saw countless soldiers training a mountainous landscape and a temple in the distance. He also heard some people talking about portals and monsters. It was then that Yu Beikyun realized where he was. Jung-won explained that this was the main compound of the Holy Sword, the property of the young master. He was at home. Even so, Yu despaired. He said it wasn't a dream. It was really happening. Jung-won commented that he seemed a little disoriented and asked if he wasn't hurt somewhere. Yu replied that in fact, his head still hurt a bit. Jung-won said he would prepare some medicine immediately, while Choi said he would bring him something to eat. But before he left, Yu called him and asked what day it was. Choi replied that he had slept for 4 days and that it was now the 15th. Yu then asked what year it was. Choi replied that the year was 2035. Soon after, he left to get the food. You realize that it really wasn't a dream. The system informed him that he had completed the mission called Catch Me If You Can. At that moment, he confirmed that he had come back all right and that it was all real. Later, he was having a nice meal, relieved to have made it back to the clan as he had hoped. However, he knew that it wasn't exactly safe to stay there, since the Holy Sword family was basically a battleground for political power. Within this powerful family, the children fight each other to become the successor. The eldest son is Yu Taoram. The eldest daughter is Yu Zhongyan. Then comes Yu Hook, the third son, and Yu Min, who is the fourth daughter. Yu Baekhyun himself is the youngest. Originally, there were 3 more brothers, but they were all murdered by Tarang, which makes it very clear how the succession dispute works despite being the eldest and theoretically already guaranteed a successor. Tarang doesn't want to take any risks and wants to eliminate any possible threat, including his own brothers. That's why Hook, who is quite intelligent, decided to ally himself with him. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, has practically given up on competing for the position, and Min has never cared much for this kind of thing. Even so, the motive of the 3 dead brothers was clear. Tarang didn't want to leave any possibility of future conflicts arising. He decided to put an end to any dispute over the succession as soon as possible by eliminating anyone who might in the future form faction or threaten his authority. In short, Tarang wants all the power for himself. As he thought this, Yu tasted his food, which was really delicious. He reflected that the main villain on his route was precisely his brother, Yu Tairang. On that day, the 15th of 2035, if the game followed the same line as real life in Muhawk's world, their father would soon hand over the leadership position to Tarang. If he didn't do something about it, he would be killed by his own brother within 2 years. His time limit was clear, 2 years. After that, Tarang would become practically untouchable with the power of the clan in his hands. As soon as the meal was finished, Tai offered to clean up and Yu thanked him, praising the food. At that moment, he knew that Tarang was away, dealing with a portal that had appeared on Mount Surak, and that he wouldn't be back for exactly 2 months. This gave Yu a little time, so he told Tai that he was going away for a while. Even under the current conditions, he knew he needed to get stronger before Tarang returned because the family rules were simple. Strength is everything. If he got stronger, he would gain recognition and perhaps respect within the family. Later, Yu went to the apothecary. He knew that as part of the Holy Sword family, he had access to great teachers, so his first step was to build up his own strength. When he got there, he met Zhengwan, the family apothecary. Yu apologized for entering so suddenly since he had called and received no answer. So, he decided to go in, trying not to cause any trouble. He asked permission to stay there for a while, just observing. Yu knew that the first step to building his strength was to become Zhengwan's disciple. However, Zhengwan was surprised by this and asked how come he just wanted to take a look. Yu replied that he was also curious about the condition of his own body, but he could see that Zhengwan was very confused by the whole thing. The story then explains who Zhengwan is. He has been the pharmacist of the Holy Sword family since the time of the former leader. Extremely capable and skilled, he possesses a unique ability related to healing, which makes him an exceptional healer. Unlike the other members of the family, he doesn't care one bit about power struggles. His only concerns are his work, his herbs, and his medicines. Despite his mastery, Zhengwan never had a disciple. At one point in his life, he even had the opportunity, turned it down for one reason. He had spent his whole life perfecting that knowledge and would only like to pass it on to members of his own family as a form of loyalty. The problem was that none of Zhengwan's family members showed any interest in learning his pharmaceutical skills. Everyone had always underestimated this kind of knowledge, believing that if they needed medicine, they could simply buy it. You thought that if he learned from Zhengwan, he could create a miraculous elixir capable of drastically increasing his growth. For this, Zhengwan's help was essential. Meanwhile, Zhengwan explained that he was taking a while because he was preparing a new medicine. He apologized, saying that he had become slower over the years. Yu replied that he didn't mind. Zhengwan asked him if he was interested in the medicine, explaining that although he looked young, he was already quite old. Yu confirmed that he was very interested in medicinal herbs and revealed that until now he had been learning on his own, only from books. So much so that he even recognized the scents of the herbs that Zhengwan was using, such as calm leaf and dreamflower. He realized that this medicine was meant to relieve headaches and provide mental relaxation. At that moment, Yu understood that in order to become Zhengwan's disciple, he would need to impress him by demonstrating his knowledge. Zhengwan was surprised and asked him if he could recognize the herbs by their aroma alone. Yu confirmed this, explaining that books weren't enough for him, so he decided to collect some herbs to try out and practice. After testing several times, he was now able to recognize many by smell alone. Soon after, Yu commented that he also smelled another strange aroma in the air. He said it sounded like a poisonous herb. Jungwon confirmed that it was. And just as he was about to explain why he was using that herb, Yu interrupted him, completing his explanation. He said that when the toxins are burned off, the herb turns into an ingredient that greatly increases vitality. Jungwon was extremely impressed by Yu Beichun. He thought that unfortunately, the young master had no talent for martial arts, but perhaps he had a natural talent for saving lives. At the same time, he thought that this was a pity, because if Yu hadn't been the son of the Holy Sword family, he would probably have had a much better life. Yu then asked if Choi had told him how he had gotten into that state. Jungwon replied that according to the report, Yu had simply gone out and been attacked by monsters on the way. As expected, Yu realized that no one knew about the assassination attempt, and if they did, they were pretending not to. He commented that after this incident, he recognized the true value of medicine, since it was medicine that helped him in a moment of emergency. He admitted that he wasn't able to learn on his own in the right way and that he should train more. Jungwon then asked him if he would really like to learn from him. Yu confirmed that he would and asked if that wasn't the famous and respected pharmacist Jungwon. Yu said that he knew Jungwon was always very busy. However, Jungwon replied that this wasn't the case and that if the young master really wanted to, he could find some time to teach him. Yu was very happy, saying that this would mean a lot to him. Jungwon then explained that of course he couldn't start teaching everything at once. First, he needed to assess how much he already knew. Yu replied that for him, just being offered this chance was already a great honor. Soon afterwards, Jungwon began a kind of test, evaluating Yu's existing knowledge. Later, the system notified him of a new mission. Now Yu's goal was to become a pharmacist, becoming Jungwon's disciple. The system also told him that if he continued on this path, he could learn the skills of a professional pharmacist. Yu thought that all he needed to do right now was pass this test. He knew that if he visited Jungwon a few more times, he could learn a specific skill for medicinal herbs. And since he had already done it several times in practice, it didn't seem that difficult. He also reflected that Jungwon was someone he could really trust. Wasn't obsessed with power, unlike Shin, and the same went for Choi, his servant. In fact, especially Choi, since his family had been saved thanks to Yu's help. For this reason, Choi considered Yu his benefactor, and since he had no talent for martial arts, he would be stuck with his job as a servant forever, meaning he would never have any reason to betray him. Yu concluded that this was more than enough for him. Now he needed to focus fully on this new mission, the first step towards escaping the status of Anchovy, a nickname he earned because he was so thin and weak, was to build up his physical stamina. If he carried on like this without exercising, not even his heavenly body would be of any use. So, his first goal was simple, to do running exercises for at least 6 hours. The reward would be 50 points and an increase in his status. Yu looked at the terrible road ahead of him. When Choi found out that he was going to run, he was completely shocked. After all, it was the young master, Anchovy. Even so, Yu confirmed that yes, it was good exercise and even said that Choi could stay at the mansion if he wanted to, but Choi asked why he was leaving so suddenly. At that moment, Yu remembered all the times he had been called weak and useless. Even the family leader himself had said that he hardly believed he was his son. That's because in the family of the Sword Saints, the rule is simple. Survival of the fittest. That family functions like the kingdom of beasts, a place where strength dictates the rules and even blood ties are no exception. By nature, Yu Bachin had always been a kind person, but in a martial family where power is everything, being kind and having no talent had only made him a constant target for criticism. That's why he grew up being ignored and despised by everyone in his family. They always wondered what someone like him was doing at the training center. They even commented that he was probably only there because he had brought a book to read outside as he watched the reactions. You clearly realize what his current reputation was like within the family. Even the recruits treated him that way. He thought that if he had been born into another family, he would probably have led a quiet life just reading books in peace. But the only thing he could do now was this, and he decided that from that moment on everything would be different. He put on his sneakers and was ready to run. He knew the method. He wasn't sure if he could do it the way he imagined, but he decided to use the light body technique. Suddenly, he was able to run very fast and realized that this sensation was exactly the same as the one he felt in the martial god's tomb. He thought that if he kept using this skill, it would get easier, but after a while he was almost dead tired. He thought he was really going to die like that, and even wondered if that body was really human. Finally, he managed to complete the mission, the first step towards escaping anchovy status. He received 50 points, and his strength increased. Now he was ready to move on to the second step. Even though he was exhausted, he was relieved and pleased that he had managed to do 6 hours of exercise in a row. At that moment, his attributes looked like this: strength 9 plus 8, agility 12 plus 11, endurance 14 plus 13, and magic 12 plus 11. You thought that he was only able to do all this thanks to his celestial body. Then suddenly someone came up and asked what that rotten smell was. He said it smelled like his own little brother's sweat. It was Yukong, Yu's brother. Immediately you wondered why that annoying brother was there. Kang commented that it had been a long time since he had seen Yu, which made sense since he spent all day locked in his room. But then he asked why he was exercising so suddenly. You thought that Kang wasn't much better than him. He was just acting condescending. Descendingly, as he always did, I found that bastard insufferable, always talking garbage. Kang was the third son of the Holy Sword family, known as a notorious troublemaker. He spent fortunes on parties, and his relationships with women always ended in scandals. Every time he left the estate, he did something stupid. Yu replied that he had recently suffered a monster attack and was therefore training so that next time it wouldn't be so bad. Kang scoffed, saying that it seemed like a waste of time, but said that if he needed help, he could just ask. With a debauched smile, he purposely bumped his knee into Yu. Yu's face saying that he would love to help, just like in the old days. And then he left, taking his little group of troublemakers with him. Yu stared and thought that in the future that guy would surely be dead, and that, frankly, he deserved it. He felt like punching Kang right then and there, but he knew it wasn't the right time. The focus was different now. He needed to build up his strength, even though he was exhausted and not at all excited. He knew he had to keep going. He had to do one more set of exercises, even though he was completely tired, even though he was very tired. Later, Yu was reading the Martial God. Again, he was studying the skill called Powerful Strike, which allows you to imbue your hands or a weapon with mana, launching an attack with all the force possible. In addition to this, there were also the 3 talents techniques, which were divided into 2 main variations: the 3 talents sword technique, which taught you how to control mana through the sword, and the 3 talents fist technique, which allowed you to use mana more efficiently in hand-to-hand combat techniques. Each cost 50 points. You thought that if he added up the 500 points he had gotten from the Martial God's tomb and another 100 points from today's mission, he would have enough points to learn all these skills by tomorrow. However, his real interest was focused on a much more powerful skill, the A-rank attribute manifestation, which was part of the legendary hunter Chung Ha's set of techniques. Even though it was a rank A technique, the attribute manifestation only cost 500 points. It was a skill created by the famous swordsman Chung Ha, which allowed him to infuse an absurd amount of mana into the blade, making the energy overflow. However, you knew that despite being incredibly powerful, this technique consumed a huge amount of mana, which made it very difficult to use. He thought that if he used the 100-year-old ginseng, he might be able to activate this ability without too much trouble. When he compared the 3 techniques of the 3 talents with the attribute manifestation, he realized that they look like garbage. He thought that even if he trained the extreme with those techniques, they would be nothing more than third-rate martial arts. But despite this, he had a very clear reason for learning them all. An important event was approaching, and he needed to be prepared. The days passed, and Yu continued to work hard to rid himself of his wimp status. He also generously shared his knowledge of medicinal herbs with Jungwon. He even taught him that the herb in front of them, called berate grass, had a paralyzing and suffocating poison. However, if it was boiled, then dried and eaten, it could provide an incredible amount of energy. At that moment, Jungwon was simply beaming with pride. Seeing his young master trying so hard made him very happy. After passing Jungwon's tests, buying the attribute manifestation skill, and training hard for 4 days straight, Yu had finally made a significant breakthrough. He now possessed the rank B medicinal herb preparation skill. This was a professional level of knowledge. He knew how to combine ingredients so efficiently that when he prepared medicinal herbs, the effects would be multiplied by 1.5 times, as well as receiving additional bonuses. Finally, Yu was extremely satisfied. He had finally achieved what he had wanted so much. Young One, smiling, said that the young master was now an excellent pharmacist. He even said that he had more talent than almost any other pharmacist in the world. Yu thought that just like in the The game, the status and progress window didn't appear for other people, only for him. Even so, he thanked her, saying that all this was only possible thanks to Jungwon's teachings, and at that moment he said he would like to prepare some medicine. Jungwon readily agreed to help and asked what kind of medicine Yu wanted to make. Yu then showed him his ingredients: ancient snow ginseng, sungrass, fire spirit grass, and flaming jinong. Right away, Jungwon was surprised and asked if he had been attacked by monsters to be able to gather all those items. Yu confirmed that he had and apologized for not telling him about it from the start, but Jungwon said that it was okay, that if he were him, he would have done exactly the same thing. Looking closely, Jungwon commented that he had never seen an ancient snow ginseng in person, but the aura of that plant definitely left no doubt. It was undoubtedly a true ancient ginseng, so he asked again what kind of medicine Yu wanted to make with those ingredients. Yu replied that he wanted to create a pill capable of maximizing the yang energy within his body, enough to completely suppress all the yin energy present in the ancient ginseng. In fact, he wanted to consume the entire ginseng. Jungwon, surprised, remarked that he had heard that he had been putting in a lot of effort over the last few days and wondered if all that effort was precisely to use that ginseng now. Even so, Jungwon was totally motivated and assured him that he would help him. Later, after using his own skills and receiving direct support from a great professional like Jungwon, Yu finally managed to create a rank extreme yang pill made from pure yang energy. Now he was facing the pill and the ancient ginseng ready to begin. Yu thought that at first he hadn't even imagined that the reward for completing the martial god's tomb would lead him to this moment. Meanwhile, Jungwon, visibly worried, warned that he would be on the lookout. He said that if the situation looked dangerous, he would call someone immediately. Yu agreed, asked him to do it if it was really necessary, and then, without hesitation, put the pill in his mouth and swallowed. Immediately, an absurd amount of yang energy invaded his body. He felt intense pain and unbearable heat. His body felt like it was on fire inside, but he had to resist. The yang energy had not yet spread completely, and Yu knew that as soon as it circulated fully, it would be the right time to consume the ginseng. He then took the ancient snow ginseng and ate it. As soon as he did, an extremely powerful yin energy filled his body. Suddenly, he began to feel a freezing cold taking over every part of him. His body was now torn between absurd heat and deadly cold. He knew he had to control it very calmly, or he would die. Seeing the scene, Jungwon became desperate. Yu's body was practically floating, emitting such intense energy that it looked like it would explode at any moment. Jungwon commented that it wouldn't work that way and that he would have to call someone. But before that happened, Yu took a deep breath, and even though he was in terrible pain, he managed to calm his mind and began to use his cultivation technique. Jungwon soon realized that he was actually using a cultivation technique, but he found it too crude, something completely out of keeping with the standards of the Holy Sword family. Meanwhile, Yu thought that this was the three elements technique, a simple technique considered almost useless by many. However, thanks to it, he was managing to learn how to use mana and control his energy. After concentrating for a long time, he finally managed to absorb all the energy, both yang and yin, into himself. Jungwon was shocked, thinking that this was almost unbelievable. Seeing someone digest 1000-year-old ginseng was already something out of reality, but to see Yu doing it right there in front of him was something he had never imagined he would witness in his life. Finally, Yu slowly opened his eyes, now with his new energy completely stabilized. Later in the evening, while walking around the courtyard, he remembered the conversation he'd had with Jungwon after it was all over. Jungwon had asked him where he had learned that technique, and Yu a little sheepishly had replied that he had seen some people using it and had just imitated it. Obviously that wasn't true, but he thought that maybe that excuse was enough for Jungwon, so he decided not to worry too much about it. When he realized he was alone, he did what he needed to do. He opened his status window and confirmed it. His mana was now rank B, and he had 100 mana points. Yu thought that his mana had jumped 2 ranks in one go, as well as having received several buffs thanks to the elixir he had consumed. With that, he decided that he would use his attribute manifestation skill for the first time. He concentrated his mana and began to channel it directly into his fist, completely enveloping it with energy. In that instant, he remembered Yun Songha, one of the characters from the Path of Heroes. His unique ability was the Dragon Heart, which gave him a special heart capable of producing mana like a real factory, practically infinitely inspired by this. Yu activated his mana manifestation in his own fist, and then punched the ground with such force that as well as opening a huge crater, he also froze everything around him. At the same time, he thought that although he already knew that an A-rank technique was extremely powerful, seeing it happen in practice was something really impressive. However, he soon realized the price. He became very weak as the mana consumption was absurdly high. He thought it made sense. After all, that technique was created by someone who possessed absurd amounts of mana. If it hadn't been for the ancient ginseng, he would probably have died just trying to use that skill. At least now he could use it once without self-destructing. Reflecting, Yu commented to himself that Yoon Songha was probably in the United States at the moment. He thought it would be fun to meet him in the future, but he knew that before anything else, he needed to prepare for the event that was approaching. The next morning, Choi showed up with the young master's breakfast. He said he was so surprised that he could hardly sleep since Yu was waking up too early. His eyes were small with sleep, almost closed. Then Yu asked if anything was happening in the family that morning. Choi confirmed that it was. He said that as it was Saturday, the family members had gathered to observe the newcomers' training. He said that he had even been asked to observe but that he had refused, as he always did. However, Yu replied that this time he wouldn't refuse. This left Choi completely shocked, asking how he would go. Yu simply replied that he was part of the family, so why wouldn't he go? He didn't understand why he was so surprised. Choi, still surprised, commented that since childhood he had barely spoken to his family members, and perhaps that was why. The head of the family had always treated him so badly. Yu then asked if there was still about an hour until the event. When he heard confirmation, he replied that he would use that time to prepare while asking Choi to let him know that he would be attending. Later, walking through the courtyard, Yu noticed that people had started to comment. They wondered if Baekun was just there to watch the practice or if he was actually going to take part. That's because it was an old tradition in the Holy Sword family. All the newcomers gathered in the morning for a collective training session, which was accompanied by the great master instructors and also by the most important members of the family. Among the observers, of course, was the head of the family, Muhak, who was sitting on a throne, watching everything imposingly. Yu immediately sensed that the atmosphere in that place was no joke. The aura emanating from these guys was absurdly powerful, especially Muhak's, but also that of the family's 4 grandmasters. As he watched, he also noticed the presence of his eldest daughter, Jung Yeon, who approached him and asked if it was true that he had recently been attacked by monsters. She wanted to know if he was all right. Yu replied that yes, he was fine and thanked her for her concern, saying that he had recovered thanks to Jung Won's help. However, as expected, Kang, always unpleasant, commented that he was useless. He said that someone with the blood of the Holy Sword family should be ashamed of almost dying in a monster attack. Hearing that irritated Yu deeply, but he knew that at that moment he had to put up with that worm's nagging without answering anything. Looking around, Yu realized that Min, the 4th daughter of the Holy Sword family, was also present, watching the training with the others. Kang commented that he had heard that Yu Baekjun was spending a lot of time with the pharmacist and asked if, since he had no talent for fencing, he now wanted to be a doctor. He said it made sense since he only stayed locked in his room reading books. Yu Baekjun tried to take it in stride but realized that he might have to move up the main event. Kang then called him a wimp and said he could teach him real fencing. But Yu Baekjun just replied by asking if he could shut up for a moment. At that moment, everyone was silent, staring at them. Kang couldn't believe his ears and wondered if he had really said that. Yu Baekjun said that his breath was getting to him. A disgusting mixture of rum, coffee, and cigarettes, and asked how anyone could have such horrible breath. Kang was completely unmoved by the insults. Yu Baekjun added that next time he could at least brush his teeth before taking part in an important event like that. Even one of the guides who was there couldn't help laughing in Kang's face, who became completely furious and asked him if he wanted to die. But before the situation got any worse, Yu Baekjun turned around, bowed to his father, and said that he had a request. He wanted to learn martial arts. At that moment, he thought that this was exactly where his main mission began. As soon as the training began, everyone was very surprised by this unexpected request. Mohawk commented that he didn't understand what someone like him was doing there. He said he had no talent or interest in martial arts. Bekram replied that in fact, recently he seemed to have shown some interest. Mohawk retorted by saying that he always said he never wanted to learn any skills that would be used to kill. Bekram then explained that this was true until recently, but that after a recent event where he was almost killed, his perspective had changed. Better to die fighting than to die doing nothing. Putting these thoughts aside, Yu Baekjun declared that he wanted to learn martial arts directly from one of the four grandmasters. Kang immediately started mocking him, saying that it was ridiculous, asking if he had taken up stand-up because it was the only explanation for a joke as bad as that. Muhak also said that Yu Baekjun's talent was insignificant and that it would be a complete waste of time, especially taking up a grandmaster's time. Even so, Yu Baekjun looked at everyone and asked what if he has talent. He thought he already knew exactly what was going to be said. After all, he had played this route before, so he said that he would prove his talent and show that he was worthy of being trained by a grandmaster. Timak then asked how he intended to do this at that moment. Yu Baekjun thought that the main event had finally arrived. He declared that exactly 1 week from today, he would duel Kang and that he would be victorious. Kang was shocked, not believing what he was hearing, and asked if that joke was supposed to be funny because Yu Baekjun didn't even know martial arts. Yu Baekjun then looked at his father and asked him what he thought. Mohawk replied that it was fine. He could go ahead and try, but he made it clear that this would be his last chance. If he failed, he would no longer be part of that family, and he had to be prepared for that consequence. Baekjun confirmed that he was ready later at the training. He kept thinking that his time limit was only 1 week. If he managed to defeat Kang, he would have the right to learn martial arts from one of the four grandmasters. As part of the system's reward, he also received a free skill. Without wasting any time, he summoned a magic scarecrow, a skill that consumes a little mana but allows the scarecrow to move and attack like a real opponent. Bakjin thought that within a week Kang would be finished, a dead man. While he was training, the people around him didn't take it too seriously. One of the recruits commented that he had heard that the last time Yu Bakjun tried to train with Yu Hook, he ended up crying. Everyone was curious to see what would happen this time. Yu Bakjun began his training using the technique called Samjai Fist, a very common martial art that teaches 3 basic forms: punches, elbow strikes, and an uppercut. Using this technique, he managed to throw the scarecrow far away and then applied the light step technique, which allows him to move quickly. He then concentrated mana in his fists, making his attacks much more powerful. Meanwhile, there was a woman watching from above, someone who seemed to be quite important over the next few days, especially on the 3rd day of continuous training. She was still there watching. In her mind, there didn't seem to be anything special about the training. He just ran around the field using the light step and fought the scarecrow using the Samji Fist. Even so, she began to wonder how he managed to repeat that all day long. Using these techniques, especially the light step, takes a lot of energy, and she really didn't understand how he was managing to keep up that pace. On closer inspection, she noticed that even though his movements were simple, he didn't break his posture once. That was suspicious, to say the least. She thought he seemed strangely skilled and became even more curious about what might happen in the future. While she was pondering this, a man approached her, called her Seonga, and asked if something was wrong, wanting to know if she was still thinking about that decision. Seonga answered yes, but thanked him for his concern and asked Master Lee to take care of himself. Even so, she seemed really interested in Yu Baekhyun's training. It was late at night, and even though he was exhausted, Baekhyun was still training after destroying several magical scarecrows. He looked at the wreckage of the last one and commented to himself that it had lasted a long time. He thought he was worried that things would be different from the game, but in the end, he realized that he had been worrying for nothing. It was probably thanks to the effect of the millennial ginseng that he was able to maintain that level of energy and power. Without it, he would have collapsed a long time ago. It was at that moment that Seonga herself approached him, asked if he was all right, and offered him a cloth so that he could clean himself up. Yu Baekhyun was very surprised to see her there, but then he remembered how the hierarchy of the Holy Sword family worked. At the top was the leader, then his children and direct relatives, followed by the Grand Masters, and finally the recruits within this structure. Each master or grandmaster sponsored an heir. Naturally, the larger the faction that supported that heir, the better their chances in the competition for the family's future. However, there were masters who remained neutral and did not directly support any heir. The most notable of these was Han Seonga. Baekjun thought she had finally shown up and asked what she meant by if he was okay. Songa then commented that Kang had already trained for a long time under the tutelage of the great family masters. Baekjun then wondered if she meant that even if he trained there, he wouldn't stand a chance. But Seonga replied that no, that wasn't what she meant. Baekhyun replied that he knew exactly what she was thinking. He himself would think the same if he were in her place. But he made it clear that he wasn't going to fight without thinking. After all, it was clear that he had a plan. Songa asked if this plan involved martial arts, and at that moment Baekhyun realized that her eyes were full of curiosity. However, he wondered exactly where that curiosity was being directed. It was then explained that Songa was a little different from the other masters of the Holy Sword family. Normally, the members of that family had little interest in anything other than fencing, but she was an exception. She was very interested in other forms of combat, including magic. Despite this, because of her position as a sword master, she always suppressed this side of her, believing that she shouldn't show this kind of interest. Baekhyun then realized that now he, the very heir of the family, was openly using magic, something that went against all the traditions of that place. Songal reminded him that this was a place where one should only learn fencing and that anything else made no sense there. But Yu Baekhyun wondered who had decided that. He recalled that the martial god himself, who mastered fencing, also mastered other arts such as spear techniques, archery, and even martial arts. Baekhyun asked if she really thought that the founder of the family would approve of that kind of limited mentality. He asked Seonga to listen carefully because he had no intention of following those outdated traditions. He would learn anything that made him more powerful, no matter what it was. Seonga, who was already very curious about him, began to reflect. Baekhyun also thought that at the end of his life, the martial god himself only left behind fencing techniques and that no one knew exactly why. Moreover, in the game, the martial god never appeared directly except for a single appearance next to his holy book. Seonga replied that that was a thought only he could have. She said that she might be a little late, but that she would like to help him with his training. Baekhyun thought that he had finally managed to arouse Seonga's curiosity. He wondered if that would be a problem for her, since he was someone the whole family underestimated. Seonga herself replied that, in fact, she was no longer directly part of that family either. She was practically an outsider now. She said that if they were both black sheep, she didn't see any problem with them coming together. Baekhyun reflected that if it had been any other master, he would have made some excuse if he asked to be trained. But the only reason Seonga was offering her help was because she didn't care what anyone thought. Besides, she was the most powerful of all the masters. Baekhyun then replied that if Master Seonga was offering to teach him, who was he to refuse? He also thought that she was a hunter with the potential to become a magic swordswoman, especially because of her affinity with magic. Learning the internal arts from her would also be a huge benefit. Seonga then said that to begin with, he needed to remain seated. Baekhyun was confused and asked what that meant. He said it was late so they could start the next day. Seonga looked at him and asked what kind of excuse that was. At that moment, Baekhyun remembered her personality. She was completely different when she was in training mode. The next morning, there they were again. Seonga then remembered what she had said the night before. She explained that in the Holy Sword family, the technique called heaven breaking was used as the basic method of cultivation. Although it took a long time to master, it was considered the best technique. After all, it was left behind by the war god himself. That's why everyone in the family practiced it. The version that Seonga was going to teach Baekhyun was her own adaptation, slightly modified to his style. She then explained that to begin with, she would infuse some mana into his body, and that he needed to concentrate on how the mana moved within him. Seonga then concentrated mana in her hands and infused it into Baekhyun's body. The moment she did this, she was completely overwhelmed. She thought that the size of the energy she felt in center was absurd. She began to wonder if this was how he was able to maintain the light step technique for so long. She could hardly believe that a person who had only just started cultivating had so much energy. The feeling of energy and blood flowing through him was like a gift. Baekhyun took a deep breath, observed the process, and said that now he would try it too. Songa then concentrated again, focusing on the technique. He thought that normally it takes a lot of time and experience to control a cultivation technique correctly. This was even more complicated in Yu Baekhyun's case, since he had completely departed. From his family's traditional training methods, she knew that innate talents, such as the size of the energy center and physical potential, were important, but the actual ability to learn and develop was another matter entirely. Seonga didn't think she could draw any conclusions about him yet, at least not until she witnessed something simply absurd. Suddenly, she saw Baekhyun execute the technique with such precision that she was completely shocked. She thought that whenever she saw other instructors saying that they served an heir, she used to laugh about it. Most of them didn't seek knowledge. They were only blinded by power and influence, so they chose their pupils based on status. But now, seeing what that young master was showing her, she could feel her hand shaking. Baekhyun looked at her and asked if anything was wrong. Sangha replied that no, it was perfect, absolutely perfect. She thought that the boy had only seen the technique once and was able to copy it exactly, flawlessly. She recognized that this talent was simply insane. She believed, without a doubt, that he probably had the greatest potential of all the descendants of the Holy Sword family. He reflected that if everything Yu Baekhyun said was really true, then he had the potential to make it all come true. She admitted internally that at first she had no intention of helping him, but now it was clear that a long road lay ahead of them both. Later, in his room, Baekhyun, completely exhausted, threw himself on the bed and laughed to himself, saying that it had been easy, easy. He thought that free skills were always the sweetest. He reflected that he had perfectly fulfilled all the conditions for arousing Seongo's curiosity. First, he had made a point of training without using fencing. Secondly, he had chosen the right words to arouse her interest. Thirdly, he was extremely talented. He knew that by combining these three factors, he would unlock two new skills. One of them was precisely the technique that Seonga herself had taught him directly, called Piercing the Heavens, a modified version of the classic technique. The system then explained that this technique, known as Breaking the Heavens, was a cultivation method created by the god of war himself. It was a technique that specialized in accumulating energy and activating the body, and with the improvements made by Seonga, it now also greatly increased mana absorption. Yu Baekhyun thought it all looked pretty easy now, but arousing Seonga's curiosity was no simple matter. Even if someone met all the other conditions, if they didn't have real talent, she would simply ignore them and walk away. But now he had become the definition of talent. He was a person she could never ignore. Then, with just one day to go until the duel, the people around started to comment, wondering if he never got tired. They said that if he continued at this pace, he would end up in a coma before the duel even started at that moment. He was training directly with Seonga herself using the light step technique. He was running side by side with her, but even though he was already completely exhausted, she continued to run without any sign of fatigue, as if it were just a warm-up. The recruits were talking amongst themselves, realizing that Yu Baekhyun was really taking this training seriously, but at the same time they were frightened by what Seonga was doing to him. It even looked like she was destroying the poor guy. As the sun began to set, the training finally came to an end. Seonga told him that that was enough for today and that he should conserve his energy for the next day. Yu Baekhyun was very grateful for everything she was doing for him. He said he had learned a lot thanks to her. Seonga admitted that she hadn't expected him to work so hard. Baekhyun replied that it was only possible because she had guided him so well and that he couldn't have done it alone. That's why he asked her to stay by his side and teach him. He said that both the heaven-breaking technique and the light step still had many weaknesses that needed to be corrected. Seonga was surprised to hear this, wondering if he really thought there were weaknesses because in her view it was obvious that there weren't. He was executing the techniques perfectly, both the heaven break and the light step. Even so, she found the whole thing very strange. After all, if he was so talented, why had the family leader said he wasn't? It was at that moment that the door to the training center suddenly burst open with a bang. It was Kang who came in completely furious, staring at Baekhyun. Everyone was surprised, not understanding what he was doing there. Baekhyun, remaining calm, asked Seonga not to interfere. She was startled and asked what that meant. Without wasting any time, Kang punched Baekhyun straight in the face, grabbed him by the collar, and angrily asked him if he thought the whole thing was a pond. Joke Baekhyun, holding his ground, replied that he had no idea what he was talking about. Kang, shaking with hatred, asked why he hadn't given up the duel yet. Baekhyun, keeping his posture, returned the question, wondering why he should do that. Kang replied that Baekhyun had no chance of beating him and that just having to duel against someone so useless was a huge humiliation for him. But Baekhyun held his hand tightly and looking him in the eye, asked why he was acting like a child. He wondered if he was scared, if he was afraid of losing. Baekhyun then recalled that the duel had been approved by their father himself and that, as they both knew very well, a decision by their father could not be reversed. Even the recruits who were watching from afar were completely frightened by the tension of that moment. Kang, after staring at Baekhyun for a few seconds, admitted that it was true. He said that he had said something unnecessary and that he would see his little brother the next day anyway, and he made it clear that there was no rule preventing him from killing Yu Baekhyun during the duel. He threatened that he had better be prepared. Shortly afterwards, Kang left with his group of sycophants. Baekhyun, taking a deep breath, looked at Seonga and said that now they could go back in, and then the long-awaited day of the duel finally arrived. Of course, everyone was there to watch. Even their sisters were present. Junyen, looking around, commented that the place was extremely dirty and that the dust was no joke. She then asked Yumin, who had chosen that place for the duel. Yumin replied that it was probably Yu Baekjun himself. Looking closely, Junyeon realized that Kong was already there, positioned and ready, but that Yu Baekjun had not yet arrived. Junyeon also realized that several of the family's old men were there and that most of them and were obviously supporting the Tairang heir. Yongyun thought that if she wanted to try something, the only one who might be able to convince her was Grandmaster Jayun. Meanwhile, Min noticed that he was finally arriving. Yu Baekjun appeared accompanied by Sunga, walking with total confidence. Seeing this, Jongyun was really impressed. She even wondered if his instructor was really Sunga. Looking around, Baekjun realized that there was a magical barrier set up there, probably to protect those watching. He thought he was grateful for that, but commented to himself that it would be even better if that barrier blocked out the cold too and not just the wind. Then he looked at Seonga and wondered why she was looking so strange. Seonga said she didn't think the young master would lose, but she remembered how his training went. She was worried because Kang is very aggressive. Even if Yu Bakyun wins this fight, they could both end up very badly hurt. Baekhyun responded by saying that she speaks as if she were already his personal trainer. At the same time, she became shy and replied that she wasn't. Soon after, they announced the arrival of the head of the family. Baekhyun thought it was time to get ready and asked if she wanted to hear something funny. Then he told her that his dear brother had always been a wild troublemaker who went around doing a lot of stupid things. He recalled that once his brother went head-to-head with a monster and ended up seriously injuring his right arm, almost losing it because it was completely destroyed. Baekhyun explained that he was bringing up the subject out of the blue because after this event, his brother was given a mission. He had to become the insane one in the family. In short, he had to teach Kang, who had tormented him since the beginning of his life. To do this, he had to win this duel by fulfilling all the conditions. If he succeeded, he would receive 300 points and a God of War book that increased his proficiency. Even so, Baekhyun told him not to worry. Soon after, the messenger announced the start of the duel. He asked if the two participants were ready. Baekhyun seemed to be, and Kang seemed more than ready. The head of the family realized that his brother was in good condition, and as the two remained silent, the announcer confirmed that this would be taken as an affirmation. Kang was already thinking he was going to kill that little boy. He wanted to beat him to death. As soon as the fight started, Kang went in as fast as he could, using the sky-breaking sword technique called the Nine Dragons' Fang. However, as Kang didn't have that much skill, what he was using was really just the fang of the 5 dragons. Even so, he thought it was more than enough, and thought that Baekhyun would never be able to dodge it. Baekhyun then assumed his combat stance and remembered his past life, his original life. He recalled that he had a time when he was having great difficulty clearing Kang's route. He had no idea how to defeat him. He was completely stuck and couldn't make any progress. At that time, no one had ever completed this route, so he couldn't ask anyone for help. Even so, he thought there must be an easier way to defeat him. It was then that an idea popped into his head. He knew it was a very simple idea, almost silly but very solid. And it's explained that one of the most fun parts of the Path of Heroes is precisely the combination of skills. The night before, Choi had even told him not to train anymore and to take it easy. Baekhyun said yes, he would take it easy. Choi wished him good night and left. Only as soon as he left, Baekhyun opened his system and began to wonder what skills he would need to combine to defeat Kang. In the list of skills available to buy, he found some very interesting ones. Them were ground kick and joint break. First, he decided to use the ground kick, which basically allows you to tear up a piece of the ground, be it earth, sand, or other material, and throw it at the enemy. Kang couldn't understand what he was doing with such a useless skill, but the moment he was hit by a piece of stone, he felt something strange. His body began to freeze. This was because Baekhyun had combined this skill with his attribute manifestation, so that instead of simple pieces of stone, he was throwing fragments of ice as the weather was very cold at the time. Kang was really forced to defend himself against these attacks, but he was still being hit. His whole body was getting scratched and cut by the ice shards. Furious, Kang shouted, asking if he really thought these cheap tricks would work. The next second, Kang was hit so hard in the face that his face literally sank in. But Yu Baekjun didn't stop there. Soon after, he grabbed Kang's arm, pulled him close and landed a direct hit that knocked his opponent to the ground. Everyone was completely stunned by what he had just done. Without giving his enemy time to react, Baekjun applied the joint breaker directly to Kang's elbow, which was already completely destroyed on the ground. Of course, Kang tried to fight back, but it was useless because Baekjun easily dodged using the light step, a move so fast it was like a teleport, consuming a certain amount of mana to instantly move a short distance. Baekjun looked at him and said that his brother was pathetic. Now he commented that he had actually promised to kill him in this fight, but that he hadn't even managed to leave a scratch on his skin. Even though he was all screwed up, Kang told him to shut up. It was then that Baekjun asked him if he knew why their father had always tolerated such horrible behavior. It was because he had talent, talented enough to do whatever he wanted. Only in Baekjun's view, that was never a reason to accept that kind of attitude, not least because, on the face of it, that level of skill couldn't even be called talent. Kang was so furious that he immediately used the moon cut, a technique that fired a powerful energy blade. Baekjun prepared to block it. While Kang thought he was an idiot, he believed that he would never be able to block that blow using only his hands. In his mind, Baekjun's pride must have melted his brain to think it was possible. However, in the next instant, Baekjun activated his attribute manifestation on his fist. This meant that he not only easily blocked the blow, but also completely destroyed the technique. Kang was shocked and wondered if that was aura. Grandmaster Jaeyeon herself was extremely interested to see this. Surprised at what was happening, Kang desperately asked how on earth he could use aura. Baekjun, remaining calm, replied that in the end, survival is for those who adapt. After all, the strong devour and the weak are devoured. Without wasting any time, he advanced on his brother, combining his attribute manifestation. With a heavy blow, the impact was so powerful that it completely destroyed the entire battlefield. Songa herself, who was watching, couldn't see a thing because of the enormous amount of smoke and dust that rose up. When the smoke began to subside, only one remained standing, Baekjun. At the same time, the system confirmed that he had completed the mission to become the family nut. He received his rewards, including 300 points and the Book of the Martial God proficiency boost. Meanwhile, Kang stood there with his head sunk into the earth, completely defeated. Baekjun, looking at him, declared that now he's the strongest to take his little brother's mansion, status, and money for himself, because that belongs to the winner. Grandmaster Jaeyeon was completely shocked and wondered how he had managed to learn to use aura and attributes in just 1 week, and yet without anyone teaching him. The Grandmaster, who was standing next to her, commented that he had heard that instructor Songa was helping with his training. However, what she taught him was only one cultivation technique, specifically the light step. The other masters also began to wonder if no one had really taught him aura manipulation. After all, it seemed unbelievable that he had learned it on his own. Jaeyeon began to think that perhaps he really was a genius. It didn't make any sense. In her mind, Baekjun should never have been that talented. In fact, she remembered that even her father had tried all kinds of techniques when he was young, and this made her wonder if perhaps her father's judgment of him was completely wrong. The head of the family, Muhak, watched everything with a smile on his face, clearly satisfied. He then ordered Baekjun to be taken to his quarters later. Baekjun himself was very tired after the fight, and even commented that he had almost run out of mana in the middle of the fight. Looking at him, Seonga said that he was simply perfect. She admitted that she thought he would get hurt, but to her surprise, he won without even suffering a scratch. He found that completely incredible. Baekjun replied by saying that she didn't need to worry. But when he looked at her, he realized that Seonga was much more excited than before. So, he thought that at this rate, perhaps she would agree to become his personal trainer. In fact, if it was within the game, he would certainly try to force the situation. But right now, he didn't need to rush things because sooner or later she would become his instructor anyway. It was then that a messenger suddenly appeared to say that the family leader was calling for Baekjun. Baekjun thought that his father would probably ask him which grandmaster he would like to learn the techniques from. He knew that he would soon come face to face with his father, but he also understood that this alone was not enough. Kang would now be treated by the healer Jungwon after having been completely destroyed by his younger brother, who had only trained for a week. Not only had he lost, but he had been completely humiliated without even being able to leave a scratch on Baekjun. Kang's reputation within the family was about to plummet, but Baekjun thought there was still more he could get out of his big brother. Maybe he could do what he had tried last time, only now with success. Later, in the Mahawk family leader's quarters, there were him, his subordinates, and the grandmasters. Mahawk, with his usual intimidating look, faced his son. He then asked him if he really wanted to learn martial arts. He explained that the great instructors and grandmasters are the pillars of the Holy Sword family, and that only those with exceptional talent and worth can receive their knowledge. Muhak then asked directly if Bakjun considered himself talented. Bakjun replied by asking if his own father didn't think so. At the time, one of his subordinates even despaired at his audacity. Mohawk commented that Bakjun had a lot of confidence, but made it clear that he couldn't learn from all the grandmasters. Only one. And if the grandmaster he chose refused to teach him, he would have to accept that decision without contest. Bakjun thought that the pillars of the family shouldn't just be tied to blood correlation. He knew that very well, so he began to carefully analyze the possible grandmasters. He thought that many of them were already helping other young masters. If he chose any of them, it would be completely useless. What's more, Baekjun wanted to fulfill the conditions for a certain event, so in practice he only had one choice. His choice was Grandmaster Jaeyeon. Jaeyeon was known as the most skilled of the 4 grandmasters, as well as being the closest assistant to the family leader, Muhak. She was an extremely intelligent person who studied all kinds of martial arts to perfect her swordsmanship. Unlike the others, she didn't take part in the succession conflicts and devoted all her passion to developing the sword and training the novices. Some of his students have gone on to become masters. A great example is Songa herself, who in the past was trained directly by Jaeyeon. When you consider individual skill, talent, mastery of fencing and contribution to the family, Jaeyeon is undoubtedly the most influential of all the Grand Masters, so choosing her was naturally the best decision. Muhak then asked Jaeyeon what she thought about it. She remained silent for a few seconds, reflecting. Meanwhile, one of the elders thought that it was all over for Baekjun. For him, it was even surprising that Baekjun had managed to manifest in aura in such a short time, but he also remembered that Jaeyeon had never directly trained any successors, and the last time she taught someone, as in Tarang's case, she only taught very basic techniques. Besides, Baekjun had always been the type to stay locked up in his room all the time, so in their minds it would be even harder for her to accept him as a disciple. Before giving an answer, Jaeyeon said that before anything else, she wanted to confirm something. She asked if Yu Baekjun could stand still for a moment. Then she positioned herself behind him to feel his energy. Baekjun realized what she was trying to do. She wanted to confirm his talent, and deep down, he should have known better. It was quite obvious in that context. When Jaeyeon felt his energy, she was immediately impressed. She said it was perfect. Just then, one of the grandmasters asked what she meant by perfect. She explained that Baekjun's body is simply perfect for martial arts. The others were shocked, and one of the grandmasters commented that hearing this directly from Jaeyeon herself was extremely impressive. So Mohawk asked her directly what exactly she would make of it. Grandmaster Jaeyeon explained that in the past, other successors had sought her teachings, but she had always refused. She didn't want to get involved in problems or internal family disputes. Yu Baekjun responded by saying that it was fine, that he understood and respected her decision. However, this time Jaeyeon herself said that she had no choice but to make an exception and go against her own principles. She said that she would accept him and try to teach him. Mahak agreed, saying that if that was what she wanted, it was decided. He then warned that from that moment on, since the Grand Master had been chosen, all the others should leave the room. It was then that Yu Baekjun spoke up, saying that he still had a request to make. He asked Muhak for permission to use the family's wealth for a while. Right away, even Jaeyeon herself was surprised by this request. She thought that until today, people like Yu Tae-rong, Yu Jong-yeon, Yu Hook, and even Yu Min had always been able to use the family's resources freely. Meanwhile, Baekjun, who was treated as if he wasn't even part of the family, received only the bare minimum needed to survive. In practice, if Muhak agreed to this request, it would be like publicly declaring that he recognized Baekjun as a legitimate son. Until that moment, Baekjun had been content with the little money he received, but he knew that from now on that would no longer be enough. If he wanted to become stronger, he would need these resources. Muhak then replied that he agreed and without hesitation, ordered his subordinates to remove all the assets belonging to Yu Hook and transfer them to Yu Baekjun. This left everyone present completely shocked, but Muhak went even further, also ordering that as soon as Yu Hook woke up, he should be forbidden to use any of the family's resources or help. One of the masters present even commented that it was too heavy, but Muhak just looked at her sternly. He asked coldly if she really thought it was too much. Then he asked a direct question. Had Yu Gancho been neglected in his training? He himself answered no. He said that yes, Hook has talent, but he has chosen to ignore responsibility and settle for his own behavior. Muhak then continued, recalling that Hook lost the duel and asked if there was anything he did better than Baekjun in that fight, and he made it very clear that this was the holy sword. Family, and that there was no room for weaklings there. After that, he just said that if everyone had understood, they should leave immediately. Later, as the sun was setting, Muhak asked Jaeon what she thought of all this. She wanted to confirm whether he was talking about the young master Baekjun. Jaeon then replied that she had taught many talented individuals over the years, but none of them could compare to Yu Baekjun. In her opinion, he might even be able to rival Muhak himself. Muhak was surprised. He thought it was strange. After all, he had always watched his son and throughout his life had never noticed any signs of talent in him. Jaeon herself had also thought the same in the past. However, everything began to change after Baekjun returned from that incident with the monsters. Since then, he had changed completely. Muhak commented that something had certainly happened to him during that period. Jaeon agreed, saying that this was the only possible explanation. Even so, Muhak found the whole thing extremely interesting. A new variable had emerged in the family succession conflict. Meanwhile, in his room, already recovered from all the fatigue, Yu Baekjun began to learn the teaching, directly from Grandmaster Jaeon. At that time, he also increased his proficiency in the Book of the Martial God, which now had 2 stars. He realized that with 2 stars, as well as learning skills, he could also acquire special traits. These traits are like divine blessings or natural talents. There are traits such as poison resistance, accelerated mana regeneration, and many others that are extremely useful. However, he also knew that certain events in the system would only be activated if he had specific combinations of these traits. Baekjun then remembered that it would be about a month and a half before Yu Tairang returned, and when that happened, he knew it would be inevitable that Tairang would come after him directly. So, he thought he needed to get much stronger by then. Determined, he concluded that before officially joining the martial society, he needed to gather some information, and for that, he decided to enlist Choi's help. Choi asked if the young master wanted him to go to Gangnam to find out which items would be auctioned off in a week's time. Yu Baekjun replied that that was exactly what it was. It is explained that Path of Heroes is a game where the story and scenarios change with each round. Even if someone plays the same route in the same way, the locations of the enemy bases can be different. This means that if the playable character acts differently, many variables can arise rather than risk missing important events because he was busy with other things. Yu Baekjun thought it would be better and more efficient to let Choi take care of it, since at the moment he was focused on taking everything that belonged to Kang. He was impressed by the absurd amount of wealth Kang had accumulated. While he was organizing this, Seonga appeared and handed him a card. It was a black card, something that only 0.1% of the richest people in the world can use. The Holy Sword family, even though they lived hidden away in their refuge, had amassed absurd wealth by selling items from the gates since ancient times. Yu Baekjun commented that he had asked Choi to take care of it. But since Seonga was delivering it directly to him, of course he wouldn't refuse. Just then, Seonga said that from that day on, she had decided to become his personal trainer. This meant that she could no longer train any other recruits, but would follow and assist him exclusively. In practice, it was almost as if she had become his private secretary. Seonga is one of the most skilled instructors in the place, and that's a talent he couldn't afford to miss out on. He wondered if she was really offering to be his instructor on a voluntary basis. Of course, Yu Baekjun accepted on the spot. After all, it was like winning the lottery. Later, he was reading again. He thought that since he had trained so much over the last few days, it was time to learn at least one trait. It was then that he found the energized trait, ranked C. This trait makes the body no longer feel fatigue easily and also greatly increases the speed of energy recovery. He realized that the cost was 300 points, much more expensive than he had imagined for AC-ranked trait. As the effect of the millennial ginseng had worn off, he needed to use it now. After all, the only reason he trained night and day non-stop was precisely because of the elixir's temporary effect, but of course it doesn't last forever. Yu Baekjun decided that he would keep this trait, but now he needed to acquire a skill as well. It is explained that there are 2 ways to learn skills on the Path of Heroes. The first is the classic way, by training and mastering techniques little by little. The second is by using skill books, which allow you to instantly gain a technique. These books contain all the necessary knowledge and information about the skill, and by reading the book completely, you can learn it instantly. The problem is that skill books are extremely rare. Of course, low-level skill books can be found everywhere, but high-level skill books are incredibly difficult to come by. The only way was to train until he learned. After all, skill books are extremely rare opportunities. However, Yu Baekhyun thought that with the Book of the Martial God, he could take advantage of these opportunities whenever he wanted. And as a descendant of the Holy Sword family, he could also receive any training he wished. This was undoubtedly a huge advantage for him. At that moment, he was being received by Grandmaster Jaeon. At first, they were just there for tea. Jaeon presented that she had heard directly from him that he would like to learn martial arts from her and asked exactly what he wanted to learn. Yu Baekhyun replied that he wanted to learn fist techniques, which took her completely by surprise. He thought that for anyone, the most normal thing would be to choose fencing techniques. After all, this is the iconic art of the Holy Sword family. Obviously, everyone there practiced fencing, especially with the heaven-breaking technique, which the more it was practiced, the stronger it became. Jaeon asked if he knew he was part of the Holy Sword family. Yu Baekhyun replied by asking where else he could be, making it clear that he wasn't refusing fencing. For him, fist techniques would only be the beginning. His goal was to master all forms of martial arts, just as the ancient martial god once did. Anything that could help him become stronger, he planned to use. Yu Baekhyun then seized on the subject and commented that he had heard that she had researched martial arts used by the ancient martial god and asked if she could help him with that. Jaeon smiled and replied that he was indeed very interesting and well-informed. He thought that he had obviously approached her for this very reason. Jaeon said that was fine, that as he had asked, the first thing he would learn would be fist techniques. She explained that she had found several records after traveling around the world, but there was a problem with this technique. The manual where it was recorded was only partially recovered, which meant that it was an incomplete technique. Jaeon was very honest and said that if he really wanted to become more powerful, he needed to learn the swordsmanship technique. However, Yu Baekhyun said that he hadn't changed his mind and that he really wanted to learn the fist techniques. Jaeon commented that he was very stubborn, but that he would do exactly as he wanted. Later, at the training center, Yu Baekhyun realized that, as expected of Jaeon, she always found the best talents and methods. Jaeon explained that she would be showing 2 techniques in total, but because the technique was incomplete, several of its forms were lost. To do this, she accumulated mana and created magical scarecrows. Everyone present was impressed. After all, it was an extremely rare scene to witness. A system window appeared in front of Yu Baekhyun. The mission was called, "Of Course, I'm a Genius." His victory over Yu Hook had caused a huge stir in the family, but many people still doubted his talent. Now he had to prove his worth. The mission was to carefully observe the technique that Jaeon was going to demonstrate and imitate it perfectly. Since he was a genius, he would be able to do this without any problems, and the reward would be 200 points. He thought it would be quite easy. Jaeon then began to demonstrate the first technique called Celestial Annihilation. With just one strong stomp on the ground, she created a powerful gust of wind. Assuming her combat stance, she made the energy circulate around her, forming a cycle. All this energy condensed until, with one powerful blow, she created a huge dragon made of energy, which lunged forward and completely blew up the poor scarecrow. Yu Baekhyun was impressed, thinking that Celestial Annihilation lived up to its name because the power was insane. Jaeon explained that just as the technique's power was extremely high, its mana consumption was also absurd. A person with a normal-sized energy center wouldn't even be able to perform it properly. Yu Baekhyun replied that he had already imagined that, so Jaeon prepared to show the second technique, but before that she went over to one of the scarecrows and commented that they were also capable of attacking by firing spheres of mana. To demonstrate, she threw one of these spheres with a little mana infused directly at Yu Baekhyun, who managed to block it quickly. Jaeon explained that the lethality of these mana spheres is quite low, so they wouldn't cause serious injuries, but they would certainly cause a little pain if they hit. Yu Baekhyun wondered why she had targeted him, and even wondered if something like this had happened in a previous round of the game. Jaeon replied that this was because of the second technique she was about to demonstrate and asked him to watch very carefully. Soon after, one of the scarecrows fired another sphere of mana in her direction. In fact, all the scarecrows started firing at the same time. Just as the spheres were about to reach her, Jaeon used the second technique, which created a kind of barrier capable of completely blocking all the mana shots. But she didn't stop there. She accumulated all this blocked energy and then returned the mana spheres with much more power than they had been thrown. Everyone was completely impressed, not only by her using a martial art of this level, but also by how perfectly she had mastered this technique. Many didn't even know where to start trying to reproduce something like this. Jaeon explained that this was a technique that gently absorbed force and then returned it. The name of this movement was the return attack. She commented that although it looked less visually impressive than celestial annihilation, return was actually much more difficult to execute. Yu Baekhyun understood on the spot, realizing that mana control had to be absurdly precise. He thought that this was in fact an extremely practical skill, and that once he had learned it, he would have many opportunities to use it in the future. Jaeon commented that although she had never used this technique in a real battle, she believed it would be very useful, especially against mages. Yu Baekhyun replied that he thought the technique was incredible and that he would try to reproduce it. Jaeon was surprised and asked if he was serious. All the recruits around were also dumbfounded, unable to believe what they were hearing. They didn't understand what Yu Baekhyun was doing there, receiving personal instruction from the Grandmaster. Some even began to comment, wondering why that weakling was receiving this kind of training. Another replied that he had apparently won the approval of the family leader, but even so, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. At that moment, Jaeon went behind one of the scarecrows and asked him if he was sure he wanted to start with the second technique. Yu Baekhyun replied that yes, he was sure. Jaeon wondered what that boy was thinking. Did he really want to copy what he had just seen? She also reflected that the other recruits there hadn't seen his fight against Kang, so no one expected anything at all from young Master Baekhyun. Not even Jaeon herself knew if he would be able to copy it correctly, but Yu Baekhyun said he was ready. He thought that in order to learn a skill through training, he needed to experience it for real. He needed to live that skill in his own body. In any case, this could only be done through intense training. But Yu Baekhyun was different as soon as the scarecrows started shooting mana in his direction. Not that he really was different. After all, he had a heavenly body. He used his flaming mana to easily block all the shots, creating a cyclone around him, just as Jaeon had done. She was completely shocked to realize that he was actually absorbing all the mana from the attacks. Then Yu Baekhyun concentrated it all and was ready to give it back. But he did so in an even more surprising way, converting all the accumulated energy into a huge flaming beast. In other words, he used both techniques at the same time, creating a gigantic explosion of energy. All the recruits were completely speechless. Jaeon wondered how this was possible. She thought she had once been called a genius, but even she had taken a long time to master these techniques. However, the young master not only imitated after seeing it just once, but also went one step further. Yu Baekhyun completed his genius mission, receiving 200 points as a reward. Jaeon commented that he was simply incredible and that she had never imagined he would be able to use both techniques combined in a single blow. Yu Baekhyun replied that he was flattered, but acknowledged that his mana was still insignificant compared to hers, so he couldn't cause as much. Much destruction as she could, Yu Baekhyun thought he needed to cultivate a lot more mana inside his own body. Even though Jaeon was impressed by the power he showed, her power was still completely overwhelming. Baekhyun recognized that the destruction he had caused using celestial annihilation was nothing compared to what she could do. Jaeon replied that she had also felt that way in the past, but now she truly believed that he was a talent like she had never seen before. She had trained many disciples, but none of them had the talent he showed, and in the future she would probably never find another like him either. Jaeon commented that she didn't really know how much she could teach him. She wasn't very confident about being a good teacher for someone with such absurd talent. Yu Baekhyun, analyzing that conversation, realized that this mission was something a little hidden in the game. Depending on his performance, the reward could be quite different, and from the line he was taking, he had probably unlocked a new variation of this mission, precisely because he had shown a combination of skills that the system considered rare. Now all he had to do was keep learning from Jaeon, because the next skill he would receive as a reward would be Ghost Steps. Jack Jun thought that this skill was extremely useful. In fact, he had already planned to buy it at some point, but getting it for free was much better. Except there was a clear problem with the route he was taking. This line of mission could also lead to a fatal end. Jaeon then explained that she wanted to teach him that. She asked him if he had heard of the Ghost Steps, explaining that it was a technique that could be used to gain preparation time, but that in fact this was also the biggest flaw of celestial annihilation. Since the time to prepare the blow left the user vulnerable, Jaeon commented that rather than talking too much, it would be better to try it straight away, as he would learn a lot more in practice. Yu Baekhyun realized at that moment that the real problem wasn't the technique, but his fate, because in fact, what was fatal there was the intensity of Jaeon's training. So, a week passed and as expected, Yu Bak-jun was treated like a real dead dog. He couldn't take it anymore, but Jaeyeon still said he was amazing. She stood there without a drop of sweat, watching him completely destroyed. Yaeyeon commented that even though it had only been a week, he had greatly increased his abilities. He was now able to use the ghost, steps and celestial annihilation quite accurately. Yu Baekhyun, however, replied that it was still a long way from the level she had expected. Just then, other people approached. They were Seonga and Jung. Jung commented that even to him, Baekhyun's thinking seemed a little arrogant. Even Jaeyeon was surprised to see them there. She commented that it had been a long time since she had seen him, and Jung replied that he had come to bring some medicine to help Baekhyun recover. Jaeyeon then commented that she hadn't seen Seonga for a long time either, joking that she had disappeared. She then asked what exactly had brought the two of them there that day. Yu Baekhyun answered, asking if she really didn't know. A week ago, Seonga became his direct instructor. Jeon then looked at her and remembered that when Seonga became an instructor, she had clearly said that she wouldn't help anyone exclusively. At that moment, everyone started laughing and Seonga, a little shy, didn't know where to put her face. Seonga commented that she had changed her mind. Jaejin replied that it was fine, that she had gone too far with that joke, but that deep down she was happy to see her disciple again after so long. Seonga explained that she hadn't just changed her mind on impulse. Jaeyeon said that she understood because she was sure that she had thought long and hard before making that decision, not least because she had always trusted her disciples so much. Then Jaeyeon informed him that today's training was over, but warned that in a month's time, Master Tarang would return and asked directly if young Master Yu Baekhyun intended to compete for the succession. Baekhyun replied that he had come too far to simply give up now, and above all, now that he had shown his fangs, he knew that his brother would not leave him alone. Jaeyeon commented that there was always the option of joining his faction, just like Kang did. Baekhyun then asked if she really thought he would do something like that. Jaeyeon replied that it was just a pointless worry. She commented that if Jongmin and Ryeon were alive, succession situation would be much more complicated. Baekhyun then confirmed that those were his older brothers. Jaeyeon explained that specifically, Jongmin was extremely loved by Jongyeon, and to this day she remembered how devastated his sister was when he died. Jaeyeon warned that from now on, the other heirs wouldn't leave him alone. She warned that both Rang and Jeonjeon were completely obsessed with this position and that they wouldn't care one bit what means they had to use to achieve their goals. Yu Baekjun replied that he knew this better than anyone. Jaeyeon then acknowledged that he had worked very hard during that week and said that it was a real honor to have been his teacher. Later, while returning with Sunga, Yu Baekjun reflected on his brothers who were already dead. Officially, they were said to have died in accidents, but of course he knew that wasn't true. They both publicly expressed their desire to become successors, and that was exactly why the Tairang killed them, disguising the murders as accidents. The Tairang had even tried to kill Yu Bak-jun himself, even when he was a long way from becoming a successor. But now that he had shown his fangs, he knew that when the Tairang returned, he would be at the top of the elimination list. That's why he urgently needed a kind of power that even Tairang couldn't get easily. In the midst of this thought, they were completely shocked when they saw Choi, who was at least 100 kilos overweight. They simply had no reaction. Yu Bak-jun commented that he was a little surprised, remembering that there was a route in the game that developed exactly like this, but he still almost didn't recognize Choi. Seonga immediately asked who dared to invade the Holy Sword's territory. She said she didn't know who that guy was, but if he was an enemy, he would die right there and now. That's when Yu Baekhyun commented that in fact, that was Choi himself. Seonga, not believing it, asked him if he was sure, because that guy looked more like a pig than anything else. After taking a closer look, she realized that yes, it really was Choi. Later, they were all trying macarons. Seonga commented that it was incredible, that the taste was simply amazing. Only then did she understand how Choi had gained so much weight in just 1 week. Choi replied that it was actually more surprising that she had never eaten macarons before than that he had gained so much weight. Seonga explained that she had always grown up in that place within the Holy Sword family and had never had contact with this kind of thing. Yu Baekjun thought it made perfect sense. After all, Seonga was an orphan and had grown up in the Holy Sword family from an early age. Choi then told Yu Baekjun that he had completed the investigation he had wanted so much. He told him that they were currently selling rare spirit bodies and that he had also obtained an invitation to the auction. In fact, he got 2 invitations, just in case Baekjun wanted to take someone with him. Yu Baekhyun commented that if Choi brought 2 invitations, then obviously they had to use both of them. While analyzing the time when that audience would begin in the big city at the branch of the Holy Sword family in Seoul was the branch director, Lee Jun-woo. He wondered if the young master was really coming and was already preparing everything to welcome him. Soon there they were in the big city, attracting a lot of attention from the people around them. Seonga was quite shy, realizing that all eyes were on them. Yu Baekhyun commented that it was natural, especially with her dress like that. Seonga replied that she was being careful because someone might end up targeting them. Baekhyun said that she didn't need to worry so much, that in the big city, acting like that made her look even weirder. Seonga commented that it wasn't easy to get used to, especially in a place with so many people. Yu Baekhyun asked if she didn't come to the city often. Seonga replied that she didn't, that she simply had no reason to. Baekhyun then asked when she had last come here, and Seonga replied that it was probably when she became an instructor and had to register with the hunters. Association Yu Bakjun then asked if that association was that building across the street, and Songa confirmed that it was, but that in practice it was just an empty organization. Yu Bakjun then reflected on this, thinking that ever since monsters and portals started appearing hundreds of years ago, those so-called hunters had organized themselves to deal with the monsters. Several of these organizations have survived since ancient times, becoming guilds, magic towers, or even famous families like the Holy Sword family itself. Basically, these groups have accumulated so much money and influence that the Holy Sword family currently has more power than the government itself, even more than the association. Seonga commented that the association was something he didn't need to worry about. Yu Baekhyun replied that, for the time being at least, he agreed, although he knew that this story would change completely when Han Chang-woo joined this group. When they finally handed in the invitations and entered that audience, they went up the elevator and found themselves in an absurdly chic place. It was like a big ballroom with restaurants, bars, tables, fine dining, and very well dressed. People Yu Baekhyun commented that they had arrived just in time. Sunga was in awe, unable to believe that there was such an impressive space hidden underground. Baekhyun agreed, saying that the place really was very spacious. Sunga was also surprised by the number of hunters present and asked if they were all there for the auction. Yu Baekhyun replied that he thought so. She then asked what kind of auction it was, and Baekhyun said that she would understand as soon as it started, recommending that they go to the second floor where the view would be better when the auction finally began. The auctioneer appeared to thank everyone for attending and announced that the Somnium auction was starting, a house specializing in trading extremely rare items from this world and even the other world. That day, special items would be auctioned off, collected directly from monsters in the other world. The auctioneer said he would skip the introductions and start immediately. The first item was of high rank, brought directly from the Dark Zone. It was a skill book, specifically a magic book. Yu Bakjun immediately found that item very interesting. The first bid started at 100 million, soon rising to 120 million. Seonga was visibly enchanted by the book. Yu Baekhyun thought that of course she had a natural talent for magic, so it was perfectly normal for her to show such interest, especially when it came to a high-ranking book. But at the same time, he knew that for her the most urgent thing now was to find her own artifact, and that was starting to become a little frustrating. Even though he was sure that this artifact should appear soon, the bids began to rise rapidly. First 200 million, then 220, 240, until suddenly a guy bid 1 billion at that moment. Yu Baekhyun looked at this man and realized that he was exactly who he was looking for. Later, when the auction was nearing its end, it was time for the presentation of the main item. The final attraction was something taken straight from the Soraksan Mountains, where all kinds of monsters live, and among them, the most powerful spirits. The item was nothing less than the body of a snow tiger. The body was so large that it took up the entire stage. Songo was completely amazed by the absurd amount of mana that body had. The auctioneer explained that there was so much mana there that it looked as if the tiger was still alive. He also said that the body had been specially treated immediately after death, keeping the monocore completely intact. So obviously everyone was interested and ready to bid. The first bid started at 1 billion and soon rose to 1.5, then 1.9 and quickly reached 2 billion. Sunga commented that they were raising the price like crazy. Yu Baekhyun replied that it was only natural. After all, this was the body of a snow tiger. Every part of it had an absurd value. The skin, the core, the heart, absolutely everything was extremely valuable. So Baekhyun wondered if he should also enter the contest. The bids were steady at around 2 billion when, without hesitation, Yu Baekhyun made a direct bid of 6 billion. Right away, even Seonga was completely shocked. She commented that even though she had access to the family's money, spending 6 billion was simply absurd. But Baekhyun replied that it was nothing. His father wouldn't even care. For his family, 6 billion was practically pocket change. Even so, the other participants didn't accept this bid and continued to raise. At that moment, Baekhyun realized that he couldn't underestimate the value of a snow tiger body. No one was willing to give up. Songa reminded him that he had only recently received permission to use his family's money, so he had to be careful. However, without a second thought, Baekhyun upped the bid to 10 billion, leaving her desperate. The auctioneer announced that the price had risen to 10 billion in the blink of an eye. He asked if anyone would bid more. The man who had previously bid 1 billion was breaking out in a cold sweat. He couldn't believe that boy had gone from 6 billion straight to 10. Even so, he thought he still had money, but that increase was violent even for him. He stared at Baekhyun, who looked like a gigolo, and wondered where that kid got so much money. Even so, he decided not to give up and raised it to 10.2 billion. Irritated, Baekhyun bid 15 billion, leaving Seonga in complete disbelief. The man desperately raised the bid to 15.1, but Baekhyun immediately raised it to 20 billion. At this point, Seonga was practically giving up on life. The other man realized that above 20 billion, it was simply impossible for him. Even though he wanted that snow tiger body badly, he could. They couldn't get over it. The item was then sold for 20 billion. The auctioneer announced that the auction had come to an end, but assured them that the next ones would be just as interesting. Afterwards, as they walked through Seoul, Seonga commented that it was much more practical than he had imagined. Since the tiger's entire body was inside a simple bag, Yu Baekhyun explained that it was a magical item, a subspace capable of storing huge objects in a compact form. Soon after, Baekhyun asked if by any chance Seonga knew Stargal, leaving her a little confused. Nevertheless, she replied that yes, she knew what that magical tower was. After all, Stargal is simply the largest magical organization in the world, with a reputation so great that it even maintains close relations with the Holy Sword family. Baekhyun explained that being recognized by the magic tower is much harder than it sounds. Their demands are absurd. Just by looking at the intensity of the training inside the Stargal, you can see that it is absolutely second to the training of the Holy Sword family. The truth about Stargal is that it was created by dropouts from the magic tower. They call the tower a mercenary organization. But in Yu Baekhyun's view, the reality is much worse. In his opinion, they are much closer to being a criminal organization. And of course, it was natural for them to go crazy when someone managed to get their hands on an extremely rare magic item. That's exactly what happened at that moment. They were surrounded by a huge group, and that same crazy guy who tried to buy the snow tiger's body was there, completely obsessed, wanting to steal it from Yu Baekhyun. He looked like a psychopath begging for that item. The group commented that from the looks of it, Baekhyun was just a rich kid. Someone who didn't seem to have any real power, so for them it wouldn't be a problem. Songo wondered if they really knew who they were messing with, but the leader of the group just scoffed, saying that he seemed to be just another daddy's boy. Everyone began to prepare their magic and fired direct attacks at Yu Baekhyun, confident that it would be an easy victory. But they had no idea what was about to happen, Baekhyun remaining calm. Activated his technique. He created an extremely powerful magical barrier that deflected all the attacks. Everyone was shocked. No magic was working against him. When the last spell came, Yu Baekhyun simply disappeared from in front of them using the ghost steps. He instantly reappeared in front of the first mage and struck a blow so strong that it threw the guy away, almost killing him. The impact was so brutal that the whole surrounding area was completely frozen. No one could believe their eyes. The group leader realized that something was very wrong. Never in his life had he seen such a skill. Fear took over. He thought there was no point in staying there, especially if he wasn't going to win this fight. So, pretending to go for reinforcements, he simply ran away. In practice, he was just a coward. Meanwhile, Baekhyun commented to his teacher that he believed that the man who had escaped was probably a senior officer and asked if she could take care of the rest. Songa replied that yes, that was easy. So Yu Baekhyun immediately set off to chase that coward. Songa, observing everything, was impressed. She thought that this boy had already reached an absurd level in such a short time. For sure, Yu Baekhyun was a true genius. And strange as it was, she had never heard of this organization derived from the magic tower. She couldn't believe how much he knew about it. Even though some mages were still trying to fight, firing spells even when frozen, Seonga simply cut through the spells as if they were nothing. The group was completely terrified. The next second, the first one was already dead, decapitated. Seonga declared that there were people in this world who simply shouldn't be touched, and if they had the stupidity to attack someone from the Holy Sword family, they could only blame their own idiocy. Meanwhile, that man kept running away, so desperate that he even dropped his skill book. Yu Baikyun didn't think twice. He grabbed the book. After all, why not? As he ran, he analyzed the situation and reflected that the location of that hideout changed all the time. He never knew exactly where it was. He even thought it would be easier if it were a fixed location. But that wasn't something he had to worry about directly. So Yu Baikyun called his subordinates. They emerged from the shadows as if they were ghosts. One of them was Lee, who was responsible for looking after the family branch in Seoul. Baekun pointed to a nearby building and asked if there were any civilians in. Junwoo replied that, as far as he knew, there weren't. Without hesitation, Yu Baekjun ordered that, except for the man who had just entered, they should eliminate all the others. The subordinates left immediately, swift and silent as ninjas. At that moment, Baekjun reflected that even he hadn't expected them to be following him since he arrived in Seoul. In fact, Junwoo and all the branch staff had probably been secretly escorting him from the start. He realized that this was the only advantage of such a difficult route in this game. Suddenly, all the glass in the building shattered at once. Yu Baekjun watched and thought that this was the true, overwhelming power of the Holy Sword family. Soon after, he was given a new mission to exterminate those pests. He had to find their hiding place.